Frederick Douglass was born a slave in Tuckahoe, Maryland in the year 1818, although the actual date of his birth is unknown. At this time, slavery was legal in most states. While a slave, Douglass learned how to read, surprisingly with the initial help from his mistress, Mrs. Auld, in Baltimore, and became quite educated on his own. Douglass had made multiple attempts at escaping slavery, but none were successful until 1838. At about 20 years old, Douglass successfully escaped from Maryland and landed in New York to begin his life as a free man. He wrote many books after escaping slavery, including My Bondage and My Freedom. This autobiography goes into detail of his experience as a slave, the realities of slavery, and his life as a free man. It was published in 1855 when Douglass was 37 years old, and was actually the second autobiography he had published. A decade earlier, he wrote Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass. The year Douglass was born, there was slavery in 11 of the 22 United States. Maryland was one of them, although slaves typically worked in farms, factories, or skilled labor jobs rather than the plantation work that was common in the South. Frederick Douglass was one of the many slaves in Maryland that learned a trade to do as their job in slavery. At the age of 18, he got an apprenticeship as a caulker after having moved back to Baltimore. Since there was an exactly even split between states that had abolished slavery and states that supported it, there was a lot of political tension regarding the topic. Although slavery was abolished in the northern states, there was still a lot of racial discrimination and segregation. Many places did not accept people of color to be in or utilize their businesses, and despite not owning any slaves, most, though not all, northern people were still racist and discriminatory. Slavery was abolished in 1865, when Frederick Douglass was 47, which would be about 10 years after My Bondage and My Freedom was published. During the early to mid-1800s, America went through many changes and experienced many significant historical events. Major points leading up to the abolition of slavery included the election of Abraham Lincoln, the Missouri Compromise, which declared Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state, so the number of slave and free states would be remained equal, and, arguably most importantly, the Civil War. Many imagined Maryland to be a better slave state because there was not as much grueling physical labor on plantations like there was in the South. But slaves in Maryland still were whipped, malnourished, mistreated, and, well, slaves. It was, however, a fear for slaves of Maryland to be sent to the deep South and was used as a threat against slaves by slaveholders to keep them from misbehaving. It was not uncommon for slaves to be transferred or sent to other slaveholders. Typically, slaveholders sent their slaves to family or friends in other towns, cities, or even states. Slaves had no say in this and were often stripped away from their friends and family with no warning and no regard to their opinions. This was the case for Douglass. He was born in Tuckahoe, Talbot County, Maryland, and was transferred between there and Baltimore multiple times throughout his life as a slave. One thing slaveholders feared is for their slaves to think for themselves. They wanted their slaves to blindly obey, not to question anything. They did not want their slaves to have an education. They did not want to see their slaves as humans. In his book, Douglass writes that the grand aim of slavery is to reduce a man to a level with the brute. Slaveholders saw their slaves as property, the same way they would see a pig or cow with only monetary value. To them, an educated slave would be aware that they are human, that they are more than a slave, and that they should not be treated as such. Many slaves did not know how to read or write, as it was frowned upon, and oftentimes, if they were caught, they would be punished severely for knowing these skills. However, these threats did not stop resilient and curious Frederick Douglass from learning. Interestingly, the one who began teaching Douglass how to read and write was his master's wife, Sophia Auld, when he was about 12 years old. I frankly asked her to teach me to read, and without hesitation, the dear woman began the task, and very soon, by her assistance, I was a master of the alphabet, and could spell words of 3 or 4 letters, writes Douglass in his autobiography. Unfortunately, when Mrs. Auld wanted to show her husband her students' astounding progress, Hugh Auld was furious and prohibited Douglass from learning any more. However, the knowledge Douglass had could not be unlearned. He knew the alphabet, and he soon realized how much power his skill held. Frederick Douglass sought knowledge everywhere he went. He would ask white children who he saw in the streets to teach him anything they could. He would pay them in bread, which shows how eager he was to learn, for food was very valuable because he was fed very little. These children were dear to Douglas, as he would converse with them about contrary topics such as slavery and diversity. Keep in mind, these children were white. Together, they would learn and teach and philosophize and talk with each other, forgetting the social discrimination between white and colored children at this time. By the time he was 13, Douglas had successfully learned how to read. He had also purchased a book, The Columbian Orator, for 50 cents. This book, which was a very popular school book at the time, contained a story of a slave who had been caught attempting to run away. The slave and his master talked, and after a defeating argument for the slaveholder, he set his slave free. With young Douglas constantly grieving the fact that he himself was a slave, this tale of resilience was especially inspiring and put the first thought in his head about one day being a free man. Another topic that Douglas sought to learn about was religion. Many slaves were religious, using heaven and God as a form of hope to continue persevering through life as a slave. Douglas himself became religious, though not to contentedly live his life as a slave with the comfort of this. His curiosity was not limited to school books. He wanted to learn and study the Bible as well. Douglas frequently went to church, where a man he looked up to, Uncle Lawson, memorably told him, quote, "The Lord can make you free, my dear. All things are possible with him. Only have faith in God." This not only solidified his religious faith, but also his inextinguishable desire to be a free man. Soon following Douglas's religious awakening, he was sent away from Baltimore, but quickly returned back to Mr. and Mrs. Hugh. A few years later, he was sent away yet again to Mr. Thomas. Between these transfers, Douglas had made himself a rather successful teacher to the other slaves, teaching them how to read as well as teaching them religion. The relationships with these boys that he taught made it extremely difficult for him to live again. And it's important to note that at this time, he was still no older than 15 years old. In his new location of Eastern Shore in the fall of 1833, Frederick Douglass began assisting teaching a Sunday school. Still deeply devoted to education, he was thrilled by this opportunity. He taught spelling, reading, and God's Word to many colored children with great passion. However, like most things he loved, this too would be stripped away from him. Thomas Auld prohibited Douglas from teaching at his Sabbath school, stripping him away from the one thing he truly loved. Then, seeing him as rebellious and in need of fixing, Auld sent Douglas to be broken. Being broken was a process of physical and mental abuse endured by slaves to strip them from any humanity they might have had left. Douglas wrote on his way to Covey's home where he was to be broken, "I am footing my way to the home of a new master where I am given to understand that, like a wild young working animal, I am to be broken to the yoke of a bitter, lifelong bondage." For 1 year, he stayed with Covey, and during this time, he was frequently beaten, whipped, and belittled. In one particular instance, Douglas fought back. After this, Covey never hit him again. This incident gave Douglas a newfound sense of confidence. He said that he was, quote, "man now," and that the incident inspired him with a renewed determination to be a free man. With his new confidence that he had so desperately needed, and his already resilient nature and grit, Douglas was not going to let anything stop him from running away. In the beginning of 1835, Frederick Douglass was relocated yet again to a new location, now with Mr. Freeland. While his condition here was more bearable than that at Covey's, Douglas was still eager for an escape. He was older now, nearing his adult years, and in 1836, he made his first attempt at escaping slavery. This attempt was to no avail, and as a result, Douglas and 4 of his friends that attempted with him were sent to jail 15 miles away. The weeks Douglas spent in confinement, he contemplated everything. Still, one thing in his mind remained: his desire to be free. After being released from jail, Douglas was sent away for a final time back to Baltimore. He had learned a trade, caulking, and worked on a shipyard where he was forced to give every cent he earned to Mr. Hugh. Of all the things he went through, this was Douglas's breaking point. He wrote, "Upon every returning Saturday night, this money, my own hard earnings, every cent of it, was demanded of me and taken from me by Master Hugh. He did not earn it. He had no hand in earning it. Why, then, should he have it? I owed him nothing." Douglas then goes on to write that to make a contented slave, you must be a thoughtless one. His decision was final. He could no longer live as a slave. He must escape. So, in 1838, at the mere age of 20, Frederick Douglass escaped slavery. His love for education and his passion for freedom made him a perfect fit for an abolitionist and public speaker against slavery. He spent the rest of his life living his dream of being free and helped others be able to do the same. The main lesson I gathered from reading My Bondage and My Freedom is resilience. To never give up on your dreams or what you love despite anything. In Frederick Douglass's case, his dreams were education and freedom. Unafraid of consequences and, despite his conditions, he worked hard to pursue his ambitions and even helped others do the same by teaching and mentoring other slaves and even contributing to the Underground Railroad. This book was eye-opening and contained many morals and lessons, but I thought the idea of resilience was the most important and personal. Education is a privilege that should be desired and can get you far, as it did for Frederick Douglass. And resilience to speak out, do what you love, and follow your dreams is the most important quality to have, and the main lesson I learned from this book.